Okay, so the first thing we want to do before we go making anything of our project itself, we're going to lay out our project and set everything up to make it nice and easy for us as we go through our game. So one of the first things we want to do is, if we switch over to our game view here, we've got this kind of default blue background, which isn't very which isn't what we want basically in our game. We want to have as a nice black background so that our simple kind of sprites stand out from it. So what we'll do is go to our main camera here, and we're going to change the background color of the camera. We're just going to click on this little circle here and drag it down to the bottom left corner so that it just makes it all completely black in the background. The next thing we want to do is make sure on our display over here we have free aspect, and free aspect refers to the amount of space that our people can see on our screen. So if I click on free aspect here, we're going to change this to be 16:9, and that's the kind of default resolution of like HD screens and stuff like that. And the reason we do this is so that we know that no matter who is looking at our game, they'll be in. We want them to be in the 16:9 ratio, so that where we lay stuff out in our screen, everybody will be forced to see the same exact thing. So say for example, if we were to put the walls that the ball is going to bounce off of, if we were to put them say from here to here on our 16:9 view, that would be perfectly fine. But if someone had a really widescreen monitor, what would happen is they'd have a whole load of black space over here that wasn't really doing anything, and that's not what we want. So what will happen is we want to force it to be 16:9 so that no matter what, the person won't be able to see this area off to the left and the right. And we'll apply that when we're building the game. So we want to make sure that when we're actually making the game, we want to work within the constraints of the 16:9 ratio. So that's why we set it up here in our game view to be set up just like that. And when we set that, if we go back to our scene view here, what happens is our camera will now reflect this setup that we have. So the box around the edges of the camera here will be now set to be 16:9. And just as an example of that, if I go here and set this to be 4:3, which is more of a square kind of look almost, you can see that our camera again gets shrinked in like that. So let's switch this back to 16:9. And you see it stretches out so we know now that this is the entire area that we want to build our game within, because we don't want our camera moving around. It's a simple kind of Pong style game, so we don't want the camera jumping around. We want objects within the world to be the only things moving. Okay, so that's our camera setup. The next thing we want to do is set up some folders down here for laying everything out as we go through. So I'm going to create a folder like that. I'm going to call this folder, we'll call this one the art folder. So we're going to put a little bit of an art file in there. I'm going to make another folder here by going to assets, create folder. There's just a couple of different ways to do the exact same thing. We're going to call this one materials, because we're going to put some various materials in there. We're going to create another folder that we'll call prefabs. I'll explain all these folders obviously as we go through the actual making of the game itself, but it's just handy to have them already set up for us in our game before we do anything. We want to have a scenes folder, and then finally we want to have a scripts folder. So perfect, those are those basic little things set up. The next thing we want to do is go into our art folder here, and we're going to bring in a sprite that we're going to use for basically all the objects within our world. So in the downloads attached to this first video, we'll see that there's a sprite here called white sprite. So I'm just going to click on that and drag that into the art folder like that, and now we have this sprite within the world, so we know we can actually use this in our game. And just for example, we can just click on this and drag it into the world, and now we have this little white box within the world like that. I don't want to actually have that there yet though, so I'm going to delete that. Then we're going to pop back up to our assets folder here, and the next thing we're going to do, now that we have all our files set up and we have our basic kind of game set up, what we want to do is make sure that we save this scene before we do anything else, so that we know as we add things in, we can just save it as we go, and we don't have to worry about losing all our progress. So what we're going to do is go to File, Save Scenes, and then we're going to go into our Scenes folder that we just created, and we're just going to call this level 1, and we'll save that. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got our basic scene set up, so let's start adding some actual structure to our game, and we're going to look at adding some walls.